And we are back on the Build Phase podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and today we're going to be talking about the Life Goes On format. Essentially, I'm going to go through available main characters. I've got some thoughts. I've done some testing at this point, so I have some actual qualified opinions as opposed to me just shooting from the hip. Although, to be fair, since I'm not going to Gen Con, I have not been coming at this format quite as hard as I came at Second Chance. Before we get into the meat of today's podcast, though, I want to, of course, say thank you to all of our patrons, and specifically Brad, Jason, Justin, Patrick, Peter, Roland, and Patrick. Without support, this show would be much more difficult to get out. So if you like what we're doing here, patreon.com/thebuildphase, the coolest clubhouse in Versus. That being said, let's dive right into this. So the Life Goes On format is kind of the opposite of Life's Too Short. There was years ago an event where I think it was Carlos actually came up with essentially this same idea, but it wasn't an official event. Now this is the official version of the dudes have more hit points format. So your main character and any that start outside the game have to have at least 6 printed health at each level. So if any level of your main character dips below 6, you can't play that main character. All supporting characters and any that start outside the game have to have at least 2 printed health. So this is essentially the exact flip of the Life's Too Short, where all MCs have to have 5 health or less and all supporting characters have to have 1. Now the additional rule on this is that you can only use cards from the beginning of volumes. So starting from Deadpool and Friends onward. So the base set, A-Force Defenders, Predator, Alien, Shield, Hydra, none of that stuff is legal, which will have a bearing on some of these cards for sure. You do still get to use the wild cards. So if you have an Avengers deck, you can still use Avengers Mansion, even though that appeared in the base set. So there's a few things, like important cards, that are just straight up deleted out of the format. So any of the utility characters that only have 1 hit point are just straight up gone, which is interesting because there's a lot of good stuff. In fact, later when we get into the main characters, Mr. Fantastic was a character that I thought, maybe he could be playable in this. No, he's not, because there's no way he can level because he doesn't have Human Torch or Invisible Woman. A main character like Death, her big fear is cards like Soup Happens or the Nullifier, and none of that stuff is legal in this format. So could this be a format where Death looks good? Well, every supporting character has to have multiple points of health, which also completely eliminates recent popular packages like Sentinels. So this is kind of an odd format where there's things that seem like they might be good and things that just are flat out deleted. So another example of a character that is just not able to be played would be Buffy. Why? Well, Buffy has 6 health. How come I can't play her? Because of her key pile. She creates that side pile with Dawn, where all the Dawns have 1 health, so you don't get to play Buffy, which is kind of an odd interaction. So first things first, there's a difference between illustrated and photographic power levels, full stop. There just is. Photo 5-drops are going to give you more bang for your buck than illustrated 5-drops are. So this is one of those formats where you have to look at the kind of main characters that are available in both pools for sure, but you also have to look at the kind of tech cards that are going to be available along the curve. Everybody's aware of the big boogeymen in the photo curve. You're not going to get all of them. You're not going to be able to have every single one of those out of control, overpowered photographic cards, because again, you have to obey the multi-health rule of Life Goes On. So really popular tech cards from photographic like Goose, you're not going to be able to play. Now, because some of these standard staples are off the table, that is going to open the door for maybe some of like the other, like the next tier down great cards to sort of filter to the top. Since we're on photographic, I'm going to stick with it for just a little bit here. Cards like Golem have seen play before, Winter Soldier's seen play before. I think this is a format where Faith might actually come up. And let's just take a second to talk about the Slayer keyword. Generally speaking, Slayer is just kind of a worse lethal, so it's not a keyword I typically get really excited about, but you gotta suspect that a card like Hela is going to see Hela play in the Life Goes On format. Essentially, while what Hela says is each supporting character's base health is 1, that kind of is the same as giving all of your characters lethal. Because you are guaranteed to have all supporting characters have more than one health, that means any form of lethal is something to take a look at. And Faith is I think, generally good card anyway with her ability to steal counters. Now it's really weak. Her token stealing ability is pretty slow. There are, of course, other big +1/+1 counter removal type stuff in the format, but that coupled with her Slayer, I think this is a 4-drop, at least within the photographic universe, that you might want to take a look at. I know Phyllis Paddock was mentioned on the collective, and this is a card I've been playing for a long time. She is just generally good as an 8/8/6, and no matter what your opponent decides to do, if they KO a character on their side and you pull her out of the game, that doesn't feel that bad. And if they don't do that and you are able to draw the extra cards or get some use out of her, like overall, I like that character a great deal. I think Odin is worth mentioning. Turning the any main character base attack into a 1/1 is certainly valuable. Ego is valuable. So there's a lot of stuff throughout the photo pool, and it's easier to find the good stuff in the photo pool because there are so many fewer cards. So you can really kind of focus and hammer in on what the best card at each drop is, and it's a much easier question to try to answer. So I guess let's stick with photographic here, and let's run through a few of the main characters that are available. The list here on the Versus database is alphabetical, so of course Abomination is the top. Now this is a main character I have never really cared for. That said, Bert recently did a podcast, check that out on the New York Minute, where he broke down not only this character, but the deck that he has supporting it, and it sounded better than I expected. I kind of went in going like, why are you even wasting your time with this guy? And I came out thinking, okay, this main character has a little more legs than I expected. I don't really care for... So what Abomination is trying to do is get a bunch of +1 counters on him. He's trying to get bigger. That's cool. If that's your game plan, is this the main character to do it with in a format where we have like the illustrated Ms. Marvel? I'm not sure. That said, he has access to the photographic curve. Ms. Marvel doesn't. So I can see it. I can see it. Angel, Angelus, I have no interest in any of those. The Bruce Banner Hulk, I don't think is something to really spend your time with at all. Buffy can't be played. Now, Captain Marvel in photographic, this is a character that has been proven to have legs. This character, Robbie played her to defeat Outriders in kind of a spectacular fashion. Gosh, feels like 100 years ago now, but I think that was during the first year of lockdown. Maybe Quarantine Cup 2? It's hard to remember. But so she's a character who you definitely can get things done with. I have always found her multi-tiers of level up conditions to be kind of difficult to deal with. Dark Willow, man, I love this character. I've tried so hard to get her to work. And within this format, her flay power of wounding a supporting character until it has 1 remaining health, that could actually prove relevant. That could essentially function pay a blue, give the character lethal, because you're taking however many hit points that character has away from them, and then if they lose 1 combat, they're dead. So this is another card to kind of look at as far as ways to clear your opponent's stuff, knowing your opponent's going to be playing sticky stuff. That being said, her level up when you play your first plot twist each turn, Dark Willow gains XP. It can be so hard. Your deck can be half plot twists, and then when you go to play her, it just falls apart and you don't see the cards that you need to see. So I do like what she's doing. I like Dark Willow a great deal, but it's a lot of work and the payoff is just not always there. Ego, I feel like his supporting character sort of disqualifies even looking at this main character, honestly. Like, if you're on photographic, playing Ego on turn 7 seems real important. The other big standout in photographic that I want to make sure I mention is First Evil. Now, I think First Evil has the potential. This is the first deck I built in the format. I think she has the potential to be quite good. Now, this relies heavily on the quality of characters that you're able to put into your deck. So the First Evil, taking cards out of the deck and throwing them into the KO pile, this can be sketchy. Her level up, sometimes just you don't get it. You don't hit those cards. And as a 0/6 at level 1, you're definitely vulnerable to just running out of gas before you can start turning into other characters. Once you get to that point, though, particularly if you couple her with, what's that guy, Surtur? I'm pretty sure Surtur is the card I'm thinking of. Yeah, Surtur is the 115 who, when he attacks, KO resources equal to his attack. I had a game where, gosh, was it John Phillips? Turned into Surtur on like turn 3 or 4, and then had 3 power ups. So all 4 copies, and I went down to no resources on turn 4. I think that was in Midwinter 2020. So that's one potential option. But there's other, I already mentioned Odin, the Super Elemental, basically any of the 8 drop cards in photographic, you're probably going to stick into your first evil deck. And if you turn into any of them, you've got a decent chance of trying to win the game there. I genuinely believe that. Valkyrie is worth mentioning, but I think so. This might be my bias, and I have always been a big fan of the Valkyrie package that runs all the Ultrons up the curve just to give her more ways to get cards into the KO pile early. I'm also a big fan of running Valkyrie with the Lone Gunman package as a way to get cards in the KO pile early. Neither of those packages is going to be available in Life Goes On. While there are a few Ultrons available, you don't get any of them until they're, what is it, turn 4, I think? Turn 3, maybe? So it's higher up on the curve, so you're going to have to wait a little longer. And it looks like turn 5 is when we get our first multi-health Ultron. So the idea of sticking one on turn 1 and then having multiple discards to get Valkyrie all this experience right away, that's just not going to happen in the same kind of way in this format. You can still run her power-ups, I believe. Yeah, her supporting character does have 2 health, so she's not completely out of the game, and her ability to just kill a main character at level 2. Yes, you have to kind of send up the flare, you have to kind of warn them that you're coming with your kill a main character power, but it's still really good. Valkyrie can just straight up steal wins away from some characters. There are a few other photographic main characters that are probably worth looking at that are maybe explorable, but to me, those are the high points on the photo side as far as main character, as well as way more comments than I initially intended on the illustrated side of things. So moving over to the illustrated side of main characters, I found this pretty difficult to go through and parse what was going to be playable and what wasn't, because so many of these main characters, I already used the Mr. Fantastic example, they are kind of reliant on supporting kit pieces. And that makes it a lot harder to figure out what's going to be viable in this weird format where a whole bunch of the characters you're just not allowed to play because they have 1 health. Um, Mr. Fantastic was the first example where I was like, oh, this guy, Loyal Fantastic 4 always seems to have some legs. And then, oh, except he can never level. I definitely think Ms. Marvel, I mentioned her already. As far as the +1 counter game is going, I think she probably does it better than anyone else. Probably. And just knowing that there is all this +1 counter generation amongst supporting characters that we got over the course of Civil War and Symbiotes, it seems to make sense that being prepared for and having answers for that kind of stuff is just going to be good game hygiene. That's just a thing that you need to do. Symbiotes as a whole, while they sort of initially I felt like, okay, Symbiotes is really going to have some legs here because so many of them are multi-health, because symbiosis doesn't work if you're not multi-health. But I don't know. It just didn't seem to have quite the punch that I was expecting. Some of those key pieces, like Hobgoblin, or wait, is it Hobgoblin? Demogoblin. They're on turn 3. That dude's a 1 health guy, and I don't think of him as being a core part of the symbiote curve. But as I have played without him, I've realized, hey man, this guy's kind of a core part of the symbiote curve. I think since I'm talking about supporting characters here, both Herbie and Danger should probably be mentioned. These are going to be really annoying, just sort of basic disruption cards that they're cheap. You can get them out early. You can weave them into a later turn alongside something else as you underdrop, and really slow whatever kind of aggression your opponent has down pretty significantly. The Wrecking Crew supporting character kits are available in this format, but of course, the Masters of Evil main characters are pretty limited, unfortunately. And actually, can you even turn into Ultron? Does he still have five? Or go down to five? No, he has six. Okay, so you could Crimson Cowl. So maybe there's something there. I don't. His level up is just so difficult to deal with. I think you can rule out Sentinels pretty much all the way around because you don't have any of the one drop Sentinels. So Nimrod, Sentinel, I guess Master Mold would be legal in this after coming out in the crossover box. So you can kind of rule those guys out. I did look at some Defender stuff. I thought maybe Namor might have something. Like if I could get set up and like hide my Wyatt Wingfoot in Atlantis, and then I remembered that I don't get to play Wyatt Wingfoot in this format. There was a lot of that as we were deck building. Oh, this card would be great. And then we go, oh, jeez, Boomerang only has one health. I can't play this card. Uh, Rogue is certainly playable here, but in my opinion, building Rogue without Kane just does not feel right. So I don't know if this, if you're a player who's really excited to play Rogue, I don't know if this is the format for her, to be honest. I already mentioned Death. Like this is a favorite main character in this house, and we have tried very hard to get her to work in a variety of different formats. And it always seems like Soup happens and Nullifier ruins her day. But here, the fact that everybody has multi-health might ruin her day. Uh, I suppose we should mention Dark Phoenix, both main character and supporting character. While the types of tools that are available, a Dark Phoenix main character that doesn't have access to Kane is certainly going to be a worse main character than otherwise. But she does such a powerful thing that if you can figure out a way to potentially use some of those Civil War plot twists that let you draw two extra cards, either for having more or fewer supporting characters in play, something like that to really juice her ability to get cards in hand and try to churn your deck. The favorite draw your all your card deck trick is not going to work. You're not going to be able to do machine abuse here because you don't have the Sentinels, you don't have the Ultrons. So that's not going to play out. So you're going to have to look for other alternate ways to sort of overcome how resource hungry a deck like Dark Phoenix is probably going to be. But if she can get there, that's pretty intense. That said, one of the best strengths of the Dark Phoenix decks was leaning really hard into ramp, and a lot of our good ramp options have one health. I definitely think that. So, because of how Swiss cheesed the curve has been, there are main characters that you would otherwise maybe not even look at that could potentially do better here because so many of the things that just hard nerf them are not available. So generally speaking, I've felt the freedom to take more chances to play more unconventional cards. Some of that isn't freedom, some of that's being compelled by the format to do it that way. But normally I wouldn't even look at a character like Underworld Deadpool MC. Like I know there's kind of a niche appreciation of this guy and like, oh, if you can get there, he does a crazy thing. But in this particular format, I didn't feel like I was playing at like a massive disadvantage when I'm trying to get this ridiculous level 4 character out. So that's something to think about. Um, Overall, I've had a lot of fun so far testing in the format at the kind of kitchen table level. I've brought things like Juggernaut, Colossus to the table. Now, I haven't had success with all of these tests. I'd say overall, First Evil is probably my pick for photographic, and I think Ms. Marvel's very strong in illustrated, but I kind of mentioned earlier how I really feel like symbiotes might be the way to go. Toxin with his 7 health feels pretty strong. It's it's hard to say. When the majority of my testing is against an 11-year-old, I don't know that I'm getting necessarily the most high level tier 1 results, but overall, I have not felt like the format boiled down to like a funnel where the options got narrower and narrower and narrower over time, with a few exceptions. I do think the 4 slot in Illustrated can be pretty easily dominated by Lilith. I think if you're running a 4-drop in your deck and it's not Lilith, there needs to be like a reason why, which is not the best feeling. We kind of want to have the card choices be a little more open than that. But unlike a lot of formats, I feel like that's kind of the exception as opposed to the rule. And that might not even be true for some folks. Abominable Snowman is an excellent 4-drop. And Captain America is an excellent 4-drop. How do I say this? Daken isn't, that doesn't seem right, is an excellent 4-drop. So there are other playables at that slot, but that is one that kind of stuck out to me where it's like every deck I've built has some number of Liliths tucked in there. Of course, the big bad at the very top of the curve is going to be Dark Phoenix. We kind of have to talk about Dark Phoenix. Um, now, fortunately, most of the ramp cards that would be available in a more open format are not available because they only have 1 hit point, which means you're unlikely to see people throwing down Dark Phoenix like on turn 6, which is a pretty common and not difficult thing to pull off when you're running Mantis and Mirage and Nick Fury, potentially Bishop, uh, potentially Gardner, or whatever else. There's a lot of ramp that's available in the open pool that we're not going to see here. So just be aware, Dark Phoenix. I get that not everybody thinks that this card feels as bad as I do, and that's fine. Diversity of opinion is a good thing, but man, I would rather she just said you win the game than forcing us to play this nerfed, gross version of Versus. So I'm not a huge fan of that particular interaction. Maximus is a playable character in this format, but all of his like tricksy stuff, like Pixie and whatnot, he's not going to be able to do it that way. So is he going to see play? I suspect not. I suspect that card only sees play when it is used in super unfair combo-y type settings. Hulkling's probably a relevant card here. That's a card that I think has actually ended up being a little better than I anticipated. I still don't think it's as good as the hype. I don't think he lives up to that at all, but he is certainly a playable character here. I always have to mention Invisible Boy. The ability to pay yellow and turn off a problematic superpower is a pretty big deal. Super Giants playable in this format and is definitely a way to try to wipe cards out of your opponent's hand, particularly if you know they're holding something really devastating like a Dark Phoenix. So I feel really good about this format overall. Now, of course, asterisk, I haven't been testing against the best of the best, so I might feel a little different if I was in that kind of pressure tank environment. But overall, I felt a pretty huge degree of freedom in my supporting character choices, my main character choices. Obviously, not every card in the binder is playable. I don't think we're ever going to have a competitive format where every card in the binder being playable should be something that you do. Like, part of the fun of deck building is figuring out what's good and eliminating the chaff and not playing the bad cards. So if they put out a set where every single card was crazy OP or structured a format that way, they call it multiverse, and we would all complain about it until incursions start to happen. I feel pretty positive about this. As far as a Gen Con format, I think this is a better format than we've had in a while for the premiere. I kind of wish we would have been able to see the Civil War format last year have a little more hoopla around it, a little more fanfare. Although admittedly that format had its problems. Honestly, every format has criticisms. They're never going to come out. I don't think they're ever going to come out with the perfect format where it makes literally everybody happy and we all agree. And that's fine. In fact, that's good. With this diversity of cards, it would be crazy if all the strong opinions. Oh, I can't believe it. I almost forgot to mention Iron Fist. Dude, if you're looking for a 6-drop in Illustrated, this Spider Friends Iron Fist is the gift that just keeps on giving. I cannot say enough good things about that card. Very, very versatile, very flexible. Not super powerful in any one specific dimension, but has enough versatility to him that he can be a real problem. Anyway, format. Overall, I think I give this one a thumbs up. I'm actually really jealous that I'm not going to be able to make it to Gen Con this year and compete in this format, but good times, good things. I've said a lot of criticisms and critiques over how formats are working and how I wish they would do a little bit more. And this format in particular was one that I kind of called out. Maybe I didn't call it out on the show, but at least within my private conversations, I called it a little bit lazy. I thought, we already did Life's Too Short. Life Goes On is just basically the flip side of that. And from the administrative side, That's kind of fair. I mean, as far as like the planning, the explanation of how this format works, it is just kind of something they already did before, but reverse. However, while the way they arrived at the format may not be the most complicated and interesting thing, the format that we've gotten actually has more depth to it than I expected and ended up being a little bit more fun as well. So hopefully at the competitive table, these experiences will also hold true. And as Whit and I grind through some more decks, I will revisit and have a little more concrete. I'm going to try to make a prediction about what main characters make it to the top 8, but I don't feel like I've jammed enough games yet to do that. So before Gen Con happens, I'll put out some kind of a prediction. Till then, go win some games.